1, 2, 1, 2.
Okay, so we can start. So, hi guys.
Hi.
Hello.
We've already met at the festival Colors of Ostrava last year, and yeah, we're meeting here again thanks to Something Must Break project. So the first question gonna be related to the latest project, which is Can the Sub-Bass Speak, which is an audiovisual project. It is a spoken word project in a sense, or just poetry. Well, I don't want to pigeonhole, but I want to give a general idea of what is happening there. And the question is, so you slightly change your musical style, or, well, it is a big change. So how and why did it happen?
I mean, as an artist, you always want to be reinventing yourself and trying to explore new territories, and it's not that outside of things that we're interested in or listening to. I mean, there's like free jazz elements and Ornette Coleman kind of on the surface level, and then underneath musically, Franklin constructed basically it's kind of the history of black music in the last 100+ years, from everything from ragtime to doo-wop to punk rock to electro and contemporary stuff. But it was when we just recorded a new record this past spring, and when we were writing it, we were all writing demos and had just lots of different ideas, and Franklin had been writing a lot, and this was a demo that he brought into us that was something he had a really specific idea of what he wanted to do, really specific idea of what he wanted to say. I mean, it's all, for the most part, all quotes of things people have said to him, or things that have been written about us. So.
Yeah, like you look like Usher.
Right.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. The track itself is something that he was so intent on doing, to the point where we didn't necessarily fully grasp until it was finally complete what it was and what it was supposed to be. Obviously, the political content and the theoretical content makes sense to us, but in terms of how sub-bass fits within our musical realm, it didn't reveal itself until the end. But that was actually a part of the original album sessions, and it just emerged later on, and we decided to come out with that first.
So you calmly accepted what Franklin was just going to do, like.
No, I think we battled. I think that's the thing about music, and particularly our music. It's very much democratic socialist, where we fight for our ideas, and whatever the best ideas are, and how you execute them, how well you execute them, wins. And I think everybody saw the potential in the song and the actual project itself as something that represented a more collaborative element of our group as well. I think people forget, or people don't fully recognize, that we work with so many different musicians and we have so many different networks with musicians, that this was an opportunity for us to also work with Skerik, work with Devon, and work with our friends Sam and Farbad, who are visual artists as well. So it's just an extension of who we are and how we work as people.
The title Can the Sub-Bass Speak just reminded me of a classical work of post-colonial studies, which is Can the Subaltern Speak, where subaltern is a person which is placed in a hierarchy on the a lower level. Yeah. So is it related, or it is just me and my fixation about post-colonial studies, or how we should understand the title of this project?
Well, if Franklin were here, he would tell you need to figure it out yourself.
This is the second time I hear this answer.
I was in an interview with him the other day, and he said, "Well, you just figure it out." And they kept pressing him, and he just said, "No, figure it out." But obviously, it comes from Spivak, and it comes from the entire discourse, particularly the subaltern studies, which was the whole South Asian or post-colonial discourse. Also, our band is called Algiers, so there's definitely an anti-colonial element to it. And I think one of the things that we've always tried to represent is a new type of internationalism that's been lost to the past, and just kind of reclaiming it. And Franklin is actually placing his experience within the wider global experience of the subaltern, and making those connections that people sometimes, particularly within identity politics, fail to make, and which people were making very strongly in the 50s and 60s through Malcolm X and people like that, and Angela Davis, traveling abroad and connecting with people from Kenya to South Asia to Palestine to Sri Lanka. So I think it's a pretty brilliant title, and it also, for me, represents Public Enemy and all these bands who were also doing something similar in the early 90s.
I already asked this question last year, but this is the first time that we speak. So, in your music, like you can feel many echoes of the past, you know. So there are many kind of like you bring the idea of Gil Scott Heron, you bring the ideas of post-colonial studies, etc. So, what is the link between memory and music, according to you?
That's a really important question. I don't know. We could talk about that forever, and I think each of us would have a different answer. But really, our entire project is about memory/history, because they can be two very different things. But the way in which the politics of music, the sonic politics, so the way in which music itself erases the past, particularly modern music, which takes from the past but erases what actually has happened to create those conditions for the music itself. And that's the other thing that we're so focused on, is not only memory but space and time and place, and how those are all connected, and how it's not simply nostalgia to pull from the past, because if you pull from the entire context and the circumstances where that music comes from, then you're actually reasserting things that have been lost in the past. And I think that's really important to our entire project. We might do it in very different ways at particular times, like sub bass is something quite different. But I think that's always going to be there in our music.
Well, maybe it's not going to be nice question in a sense, but we mentioned kind of complicated concepts, you know, like phenomenology is in your Wikipedia definition on the website. We mentioned post-colonial, subaltern, etc. Aren't you afraid that people will not get the idea?
No.
No.
I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, well, it to some degree, you know, I think once you create art and kind of put it out in the public sphere, it's you no longer, you kind of give up control over how people interpret it or what they get out of it. And a lot of times I've experienced in the past, you know, writing something or being a part of something that had a specific, you know, maybe a specific thing that we were trying to do, and then once it was put out, people just interpreted it in very different ways, and actually I ended up drawing even more out of the song or the idea than when we initially set out, just because of the questions people asked and the things people put onto it. And for me, that's kind of why you create art, and it's that when you put something out and you get it back, then that kind of completes the art, so to speak.
I really like the tense that is used in your latest project, which is fusion is more like confusion. So in this sense, like everything is mixed. But I read one really funny commentary on this project, which is, well, Pitchfork will not review this one. So is that bothering you somehow? That they will just probably, you know, this is a kind of project that I imagine The Wire would write about.
Well, actually, interestingly enough, and this question will probably come up more and more, a lot of that, well, not a lot of the discourse in the song itself is pulled from a Pitchfork review of one of our records. So there's actually extremely problematic things that were said in the review that go beyond what someone thinks about music, but also represents the entire, what would you say, the entire philosophy of the institution of the mainstream culture industry, which is Pitchfork and all these poptimist organizations who, in our view, have very problematic understandings of race and of class and of music itself. And I think there is a slight war to be waged against certain institutions that perpetuates certain images. And I think that's part and parcel of our project too.
Okay. Getting down to earth a bit, you know, sorry. But, okay, this is going to be a bit abstract, but what is the advice that you should have taken but did not in your life?
That's a good question. Gosh, I don't know. I have to think about that. I'm just buying time for Ryan to come up with an answer so that I can think more. I don't know.
Yeah, take your time.
Do you?
Any idea?
I grew up in a space where nobody gave me much advice. My mother just said, "You better finish high school, and then we'll see."
And you did.
But I did, yeah. I ended up doing my master's because when I was younger, because nobody gave me advice, I was just a little bit of a wayward kid. So maybe I could have used more advice. If somebody would have told me don't do music, I probably been like, yeah, cool, good idea.
I don't think anyone ever gave me advice that I listened to anyway, so. No.
So, yeah. So maybe you haven't been in a situation in which you thought, oh shit, I should have listened to that guy. So, because mostly in this kind of situation, you realize that someone told you not to do something like that.
Yeah.
But probably you had this opportunity to work daily somewhere. So what is your most memorable daily job experience?
Yeah, we talked about this a lot recently for whatever reason. I've worked a lot of different jobs, from manual labor jobs to service industry to office jobs. I think my most memorable ones were just either delivering pizzas because you're exploring a city or urban space or something in a very through a strange lens and going. Just going to different people's houses and I've just had so many weird interactions with people as a pizza delivery driver. But then also
Look at him! Look what he's showing.
But I also did like landscaping as well, which was really interesting because it was just myself and a bunch of day laborers driving out to these rich, fancy neighborhoods and trimming hedges and mowing their grass and, in these huge back gardens of these millionaires. And then we would all like lay out in the sun underneath it, for an hour during lunch or something. And it was just a really strange experience because you're almost invisible in these worlds. Like people you didn't exist. And then you could just lay in front of these people's houses, and you were this kind of eyesore to most of the people's neighborhoods, but you and the people you were working with would just sit there and eat. And I don't know, it was just a totally different experience,
How about you?
I've got I've had like 20 different jobs in my life, but I would say there's two really memorable ones. One, I worked for a shipping company, and they put me in the back of a truck, so there was like each of us in this back of a huge lorry, and there would be a person sorting posts, and there was these massive boxes, and they would sort them, and they would yell at you if the conveyor belt got stuck, and it was only that big, so you literally had to basically throw these boxes. And look at me, I'm not that big. And I remember like specifically people in the US, because they're so decadent, order boxes of steak. So I would see the box of steak come, and I would just be so sad because I'd have to load these massive, huge boxes of steak on the truck, and then I almost became a vegetarian just for that. The other really important one was I worked at this media company, and they didn't know anything about music, and I worked in the music section. So I also got a discount, like 40% off, and this is super formative because they stocked so much music, but they didn't know what it was. So I used to take like all the CDs that I really wanted, like there was shellac CDs and just, unwound CDs and all these really amazing groups. I'd put the discount sticker on them, take it to the front, and I would get all these CDs for like $1. So if you work for a big corporation, steal from them, please.
The biggest advice from Algiers band: when in doubt, be extreme. Genesis P.O.R.H. Thanks. Yeah. Well, yeah. Our kid's gonna be well educated,